Just putting in, setting up. So the time is now 1 o'clock. Welcome everyone to Cal Poly Pomona's 17th annual Cybersecurity and Awareness Fair. It's going to be a very fun time this evening. With me today is William Perry, who will be presenting the topic of the role of a CISO in healthcare. It's going to be a little bit of a conversational piece today with open Q&A. So of course, if anyone here has any questions at all during this entire chat, please feel free to put them in either the Whova app or wherever it is that you're going to be staged here today and viewing from home. I will be moderating. And so, of course, if you guys have any questions, I will be projecting them over to William himself. So without further ado, I guess let's just jump right into the first question. So I'm just fairly curious, William. I just kind of wanted to know, what is it that got you your start in cybersecurity, and how is it that you ended up in your position as a CISO today, especially in the healthcare field, right?
Yeah, so first of all, hello everyone, and thank you to Cal Poly Pomona for inviting me, to Curtis Carpenter, Dr. Gonzalez, my friend John McGuthrie, and of course, President Coley. I'm honored to be with you virtually. As Lewis stated, my name is William Perry. I'm currently the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for the City of Hope National Cancer Center. So your first question about what got me into this is actually one of my first talking points, how I started in IT and InfoSec. And it goes back to what I was explaining to you before this presentation. In 1984, I wrote some code. I was working for a defense industry company, a very small defense industry company. We made a power supply for what's called the phalanx gun. And if you don't know what the phalanx gun is, I would look it up. It's kind of cool. It looks like R2-D2 with a Gatling gun coming out of the front of it. And so we made the power supplies for it. And it was my job to test the power supplies. And so I would test these power supplies. And it was a very tedious process. It took, I think, about 6 hours to completely test one power supply. But at the same time, I had gotten interested in IT. And at that time, IT was really programming. And so I was taking programming courses, and I decided to practice on the things I was doing at work. And I ended up writing code that tested the power supply for us, and it would do it. So we built a test fixture, and I designed the application, and we plugged a power supply into it, and we run it through all the tests in a matter of minutes. And that used to take hours. And so if you know anything about the early versions of DOS or computer systems, they had very small memory. The RAM was extremely small. I think it was 8 megabytes of RAM. And I didn't have a hard drive. We had 2 floppy drives and a monochrome monitor. That tells you how old this is, right? Well, the code that I wrote was 63 pages long to test this. And it couldn't all fit into RAM. So I'd load the code, run the application, take the data, put it into a storage on a floppy, run the next part of the code. And I did that 3 or 4 times, and then printed all the data out that had been stored on the floppy. Well, the Navy would come in and analyze each of the power supplies. So they would come in and pick a power supply out of the cabinet and go, I want you to retest this one. And then we'd have to test the power supply again in front of them, and the numbers had to meet a certain tolerance between the previous test and the current test. Otherwise, they'd ask you to scrap that power supply and start over. So now we have a computer running these tests, and it's more precise. So the tolerances became tighter. And forgive me, is it getting loud to you? Can you hear this noise outside?
Just a little bit, but you're still okay. I can still hear you.
Okay. And so they asked to see the code. We want to see this code because your tolerances are too tight. That's great. But when you were doing this by hand, human error, we were getting wider tolerances. And so they took my code and presented it to their naval programming team. The naval programming team came back and said, you need to find a way to secure the code so that no one can go in and manipulate the numbers. Now, you might say, well, why would people do that? But if you remember, just a few years ago, Volkswagen got in trouble for doing just that. They were programming their emissions to meet the emissions requirements, even if the cars needed some work to meet that tolerance. And so I had to come up with a way to secure my code so no one could go in and manipulate the numbers. And I figured out a way. So I created a way that you had to enter a password to even access the code or even run the code. Um, and the Navy liked it so much that I got a chance to speak. And I was in my early 20s. I hadn't graduated from college, and I was speaking before some Navy programmers on how to secure code and how to write secure code. And this is my early 20s. There wasn't a class, there wasn't, information security wasn't a thing. I don't even think we called it IT a thing yet. It was just the computer guy, right? And for doing that, they sent me to a program with a class, a set of classes with the Navy programmers called ADA, which was the original Department of Defense programming language, which came in handy later because I did other applications for other defense companies. So that's what got me started. I was interested from that moment. And even though I love technology, I never wanted to be a CIO. I wanted to be the guy who protected the technology and the data.
That's incredibly interesting. It is, as a student myself, I've only been touched on like a few of these different topics that you're talking about so far. I know when I talk to other professionals as well, they reverberate that where it's like back in their time, they didn't have a lot of these different opportunities, and CIS, all that kind of stuff didn't really exist. I'm a little curious too. Has there been like a big shift in like the methodologies to secure code that you've seen like from when you first started out as to where it is now?
Yeah. So today, we have technology that can help you with securing code. So, we scan. There's a tool called. Well, I'm going to be careful not mentioning tools if that's okay with you guys. But there are tools that can scan code that has been developed and give you a report on vulnerabilities that you've written into your code. And I recommend that all developers use those types of tools to scan their code. I think there may even be free tools that you could use to scan your code for cross-site scripting vulnerabilities or man-in-the-middle attack type of setup. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
In terms of industry, because I know you are in the healthcare industry, how do you find these differences in terms of like how you maybe might handle security situations in one end as opposed to like something you would say like, critical infrastructure like Edison or something like that?
Right. Interesting. Good question. Let me give you. I'm going to get to your question, but I want to give you just a quick brief history of my work history. So as I mentioned, I started out in my early days in the defense industry, and I stayed there for a number of years. And then I thought I wanted to be a coder, so I was writing code for everybody, writing code for anybody who needed me to write something. And in 1994, there was an earthquake in Northridge, and someone knew that I dabbled in database code, and they wondered if I could create a code whereby a bank of people could take a phone call, get an address, and I could map that address to a specific contractor for an area, right? So you would have to use this contractor. So when the Northridge earthquake happened, the city of Los Angeles put together a hotline that people would call and go, hey, my fence fell over because of the Northridge earthquake. And FEMA had given money to allow contractors to go and fix that fence. So they needed some way to get that call, type in the person's address, and a contractor would be assigned. This again predated GPS. So, but Thomas Guide, and I don't know if any of you guys know what the Thomas Guide is. That was before GPS too. So the Thomas Guide is a book that used to come out, kind of like the phone book. Do you guys know what a phone book is?
At least I still remember.
So the Thomas Guide was like before the phone book. So the Thomas Guide had all the streets. You buy it by the county, and you can go and look up a specific street, and you could get directions to it. You go through this book to get your directions. So what they had been doing in developing that is they were developing what we call a geomap of all of LA County already. And so basically, I could put in coordinates, and it would tell me where that was, right? And that's how I wrote a database application for this company which spun off into me opening my own company for a number of years. Doing that, I wrote an application for the city of LA to do that for the Northridge earthquake. The city of LA was also sued by the Water Quality Management District, and they needed a way to get all of these old maps into a database. And so I devised a process, and I had a small firm doing that. And so we worked on these types of projects for the city of LA for about 7 years. While working for the city of LA, I met a gentleman who was gearing up for the Y2K issue. And he had won a contract with a company called Batelco, which is the Bahamas telecommunications company, to prepare them for Y2K. When I got there, Batelco was running Novell, and they wanted to move to Windows NT. And so before we could help them with anything else, we had to upgrade their data center and their workstations to Windows NT. And so that gave me some experience in networking and updating and implementing an NT network. After those projects ended in Bahamas, which I worked there for 2 years working on that project, I was hired by Union Bank. And so I've worked in various industries. I've worked in banking, so I worked for Union Bank for about 10 years, and in Bank of the West, I came in to help them with a mainframe application to get that completed. And while working at Union Bank, I started to have conversations with the chief financial officer for the CSU, whom I had met. And he was talking to me for a little bit over a year. We'd meet regularly, and he finally said, "Hey, are you interested in becoming a CIO?" And I said, no, I'm a technical guy, but I like the security components of that. And so I went to work for the CSU as their CISO at the Chancellor's office. While there, I was also asked to do another Department of Defense project for a company called Mantech, which I worked both of those jobs, and that was very difficult, but it was fun. And then all of those things before coming to healthcare and becoming the CISO for the City of Hope. Now, to answer your question about the differences, in working in all of these various industries, defense, banking, and healthcare, I've heard in many interviews, "Hey, you've never worked in this industry before, so how can you come in and help us?" Well, this should be simple for you guys to understand. You're working on the same technology. Firewalls are firewalls, whether they're in healthcare or in banking. The difference is regulatory requirements and rules and the types of data that you're going to protect. And so my team understands my outlook, my philosophy on security is I have 4 pillars. One is you have to develop a framework, and that framework includes regulatory requirements. It can include any of the common frameworks like NIST or HITRUST or ISO. So you need a framework, and that helps you develop your policies, right, and your processes. The second thing is you need to educate everyone, and you do that through security awareness training, through phishing campaigns, because you're never going to have enough budget. So you want to ensure that everyone that works for that organization is security minded. And so it doesn't matter which industry you're in, that will always work. And then the third thing is you want to ensure that your processes are secure. So as a new person coming on, you want to understand they have a framework by which they develop their policies. You want to make sure they're educating their staff. And then you want to make sure the processes, you look at every process and make sure you're doing it. And as my team knows that we say, let's show them the secure way to do that. And then finally, the tool set. The tool set is the one thing that is the same in every industry. Whatever industry you're in, you're going to have those same defense in-depth tools that you utilize. So for me, I don't see it as such a big difference working in healthcare, besides, like I said, the regulatory requirements. And HIPAA is what we have to ensure that we're following, that we're complying with. But all the rest of those items remain the same.
Sorry, am I still allowed to be heard right now? I'm not sure if this is on. This on? Nope.
I can hear you.
Okay, okay,
We
cool.
can hear you.
Awesome. Just had a little bit of a heart attack right now. It's okay. But that's actually incredibly interesting. I was kind of curious too. I know you mentioned a little bit about starting off in your own practice. Having your own independent business. What are some of the struggles that you ended up coming through starting your own business in IT, especially how you're saying during your time?
Right, right. Well, excellent question. And it's one of the reasons that I selected the educational path that I'm on. When you're running your own business, especially a technical business, you're doing all the technology, right? And you might have a helper or two. I mean, when we first started, the first company was called Office System Solutions. We had 21 people working, and it was a lot of work. But I couldn't go out and get more business because I was heads down working, and that becomes the challenge in getting more business while you're working. Working for a company, to me, they're going off and getting the business, and you're doing the work. That works for me. There are other benefits to working for a company. Most times you're going to have 401ks, you're going to have vacation days. When you're in your own business, you don't get a vacation day because you're losing money. If you're not working, you're losing money. And so those are some of the things that healthcare can be provided when working for a company rather than your own business.
Awesome. In terms of the tool sets that you're given, right? Because I know some of the people here who were probably at the fair might be a little younger too. Do you have any terms of like advice which you would probably want to give to them in terms of like, hey, maybe start learning Excel or something like that? Or what are some soft skills that you probably should start looking into and stuff?
So yeah, that brings me back. Thank you. You just jogged my memory on something I said. That's the reason I selected the degree path that I was on. So because I was heads down working with tools, I became kind of a tool nerd. Everybody I spoke to them in acronyms and technology, right? But what I found is the people who needed to give me the money, I needed to speak to them from a business perspective. And so if I'll get back to your question in just a moment, but so I just determined to get an MBA because I wanted to understand how what I was doing would provide value to the business so the business could perform its core duty and provide the budgets that I needed in order to continue to do my work, right?
Yeah.
So if I could give you any advice, if you're a tool head and that's what you want to do, by all means, that's necessary in security. We need those people. But if you need to lead, if you want to be more on the administrative path, I would recommend understanding business needs and understanding how to create business justifications. Take some business courses so that you understand, how to meet the goals of the business while doing your job as a technical person.
Awesome. Thank you. I know that's that's some of the few things I always ask other professionals who've been in your shoes for a very long time. I'm a little curious too on the programming side. Did you ever find that actually ended up helping you a lot in terms of like making that transition over to cybersecurity a little easier? Because we have a very big CS department, computer science department here at school, and they tend to delve really heavily in the coding aspects of like web applications, all that good stuff. So did you find that transition a little easier with your CS kind of background and programming background?
The one thing that programming did for me was help me think differently. Nowadays there's programming's a little different than it was back then. Back then it was very discrete programming. Now you have calls you can make to script or to algorithms that are pre-written. There was no algorithm back then. And I would actually go home and or I didn't have a computer at home, but I'd go to wherever I could find a computer and practice writing codes. How do I get a computer to understand change? Like if something costs $2.86 and someone gives me $3 or gives me $10, those are the kinds of algorithms I was trying to figure out. And what that did, so what programming did for me was make me think about more critically about issues and problems and how to solve them in a way that would work for the organization. And that to me has been helpful in my success as well, because oftentimes I'm given difficult problems to solve. And I'm given a problem, I need to come back with a solution and make that into tasks for my team. I'll give you an example of that. And this is kind of simple. It's simple to say, but in practice, it's not that simple. One of the challenges at any organization is that people are putting technology out constantly, and they may not even realize it. We build buildings and not even realize we're putting out technology because you have building automation systems. And so I take my job as reducing risk for an organization very seriously, as my team. And so in creating a way to secure a business while letting it continue to move forward, I had to come up with an idea. And so one of my strategic initiatives is called Security by Design. And what that means is every time there's an idea to implement something, I don't care what it is. It could be, I'm going to build a pond right here or a fountain at one of our sites. We should come in as an information security person and understand what you're building and determine if it needs security controls applied to it. Now, it may not need technical or security controls, but it might need physical. And I don't, work so much in the physical realm, with the exception of cameras and physical data on paper. But I'm not a construction guy, and so what programming has done for me is given me the ability to analyze a problem and think it all the way through as I would when I was designing applications to get the outcome, the desired outcome. Because it's not always always as easy as you might think it is.
Awesome. I'm kind of curious myself too, because you actually touched a little bit in terms of the implementation of like security controls. Do you deal a lot with that in your line of work as a CISO?
Yes. And well, maybe I should say indirectly, because I have a team.
The team is there.
But you have to provide that direction. So, in coming up with security by design, now I have to socialize that across all teams at the City of Hope that want to implement something. And so a lot of times in security or IT jobs, the technical person is not the person you need. And so I've hired someone who's steeped in process and program management, and they understand how to implement processes. That's key. And so they're socializing the security by design process. They were hired this year. The security by design initiative started this year, and they've already started implementing it. So they meet regularly, and there's an enterprise architecture team that looks at everything that City of Hope wants to do and determines what security controls we need to apply. To those. And then once they're applied and before we deliver whatever it is, we test those controls.
That's actually very interesting because we have an auditing class here at school, and the implementation of controls is something that I actually ended up doing for a competition just recently. And I didn't know that there was like a whole structure around that. That's actually very interesting. I'm kind of curious on that end as well. You touched a little bit on it in terms of communicating out, these different security concepts and policies. Is that like a really big struggle that you found in industry, being able to communicate these kind of concepts?
Yeah, these are great questions. So something, and I don't want to take a lot of credit, but what I do is I come up with the idea, again, because of my programming background. I think, I don't know, I'm not that smart, and put it out there. And policies are difficult. Mm-hmm. The way that policy development works is understanding. Remember my 4 pillars. The first one is framework. Understand the framework. So what framework are we using? We're in healthcare. We have to comply with HIPAA. And high trust is the gold standard framework. So high trust gives you the areas that you should write policy around, right? So you write these policies, but then you don't want to impact the organization with your policy that they're not prepared for. So I've created something both at the CSU and at the City of Hope called the Policy Governance Committee. The Policy Governance Committee comprises leaders from across the organization, And every time a new policy is being developed, we define why we're developing this new policy, how it's going to reduce risk or enhance compliance, and then we draft it and put it out for everyone to comment on and provide input on. And that group meets once a month. And so if it's going to impact, let's say, IT, we also meet with the IT leadership. We try to meet with the groups that may be impacted by this policy and allow Q&A time for them so that we're not putting a policy out there that they're finding it impossible to comply with. And once they've all reviewed it and we've taken their input and answered their questions, then the final draft comes to me, and then it goes up to what's called the senior leadership team, which I'm a part of, and then it goes out to a policy manager who publishes policy.
Wow, that's super cool. In terms of like how that gets affected, right? So I know like I've talked to other people who have been in industry and in different positions, anywhere from like the support role to product management, and in terms of like how they manage cybersecurity controls. I'm kind of curious in terms of like, you know, the new wave of threats that are coming out, like advanced persistent threats, you know, of higher levels of malware and ransomware. Does that kind of have like a big influence on how you guys implement controls? And if so, what's something more specific to like healthcare that you would see like implemented as opposed to something like another industry, for example? Do you guys get affected like significantly more or significantly less by these kind of attacks?
Yeah. So over the past year or so, there's been an uptick in ransomware in healthcare. Mm-hmm. And our board of directors and our CEO have made that the focus of my work for this whole year. I've been on a number of ransomware meetings. I was on a few today, and we created a scenario. So we created some things that help us with ransomware attacks, which are again on the rise. There's a hospital in San Diego that was down for months, and I'm sure you can look it up and figure out the name of that hospital from a ransomware attack. So we do a number of things. One, again, because of my pillars, we educate. We do a lot of ransomware phishing campaigns, internal phishing campaigns. We've been asked to even ramp those up and do one every other month. We do reports. As a matter of fact, Sarah, who's on the call with us today, she manages that effort. And those reports go to the managers or the people who click. And we also have education they get if they click on that link. And so the whole organization is mindful of ransomware attacks. We created something called the Incident Leadership Group. And I recommend that if you're hired at a company and they don't have a group of executives who are engaged to speak to what would happen in the event of a ransomware attack, where your systems are out for potentially months, you need to talk about developing that. And I'll tell you why. Someone needs to make the decision to engage external law enforcement. Someone needs to make the decision to engage external legal, engage the media if you need to, and to pay the ransom. Oftentimes, IT believes that that's their job, or information security believes that's their job. It's not. It is the job of the executives to do what's best for the organization. We have to give them the information, though, and give it to them in ways they understand so they can make those types of decisions. How long do you think we're going to be down? So that we can make a decision about diverting patients, because for us, it really could be life or death if our systems are down. So we try, again, this year, the main focus for healthcare has been around ransomware and preparedness and prevention. So other than that, I think that, you know, all industries deal with ransomware, but for us, it's a matter of life and death in many cases.
Wow. I know that's a bit of a morbid thing to leave off on, but that's incredibly insightful. I know being able to kind of have that that approach and, you know, have that impact. I know we're nearing the end of our session here at 1:30, but oh, sorry.
Does anybody else have any other questions for Mr. Perry? Mr. Perry, I would really like to thank you for participating in this event and sharing your rich experiences with the group. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Anytime.
Yeah, appreciate it. Then think that should be conclusionary. I believe I'll close the Zoom session here, and we should be good to go. Thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
That's what